Well, I come to you fresh from the annual priest conference or retreat that the diocese runs for all the clergy. And this year, it was this past Monday through Wednesday, this year the younger generation of clergy who were in charge of planning decided to hold the conference at an old summer camp out near Port Jervis, New York. And it's been in a family since the 1960s, and the daughters have inherited the camp, and they've tried to glam it up a little bit to be a wedding venue. And the public rooms, the dining room and the other meeting rooms are very beautiful, the setting's very beautiful, but they still have all the original bunkhouses for the summer camp. And they very quietly announced that the clergy would be staying in bunk beds in the bunkhouses. And I felt like saying to them, have you not read this gospel for the Sunday, which says, but when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. So I did what any self-respecting Episcopal clergy person would do, and I booked into the nearest Hilton. Everyone else would come down to breakfast looking like they'd just run a marathon, and I was fresh as a daisy. But during the course of the retreat, our wonderful bishop, Matt Hyde, spoke again and again about what was central to our work together as a diocese, both clergy and laity. And you have to know that Matt is radically reforming and changing the structures of the institution of the Diocese of New York. He is making it more efficient. He is making it more transparent, fairer, healthier, much better communication, and is really working to restructure our diocese. And much of the conversation with him this past few days has been about the work that he's doing with wonderful staff that he's appointed, as well as the leadership of the diocese that he's raised up. And it was clear he has a great vision for how the diocese should be, and even more remarkably, he knows how to make it happen. So it's a very exciting time to be in the Diocese of New York. But what he always came back to, no matter what his plans or strategies that he enumerated, was the centrality of pastoral care. Pastoral care, he said again and again, is the hallmark of the church. The pastoral care the clergy offer their parishes, the pastoral care that parishes offer for their members, and pastoral care that we offer as a baptized people to the world. And it was very powerful to have this be the central message with all of the systems that he was talking about and structures. It was about pastoral care. Now this resonated for me because I was formed as a priest at a theological college in England called College of the Resurrection. It's located in the north of England, up in Yorkshire. I was there for 2 years. And then when I finished my time there, I came back and did the Episcopal Finishing School of Yale Divinity. But I was really formed as a priest at the College of the Resurrection. And the College of the Resurrection was known for being, first of all, very high church. At that time, they were not ordaining women in the Church of England, now they are. And it was grounded in the high church Anglo-Catholic tradition of the Anglican Church. But even more importantly, it was fully grounded in pastoral care and training priests to be people that cared for their congregations without question. The other thing that was great about Murfield, which is the town that it took its name from, the college was located in, the college was run by a religious community of Anglican brothers, and most of them had been parish priests who had then decided to join the community later in their life. So they had two ministries. One is they ran the college, which trained 40 or 50 students to go on to parish priesthood. The other thing that they were known for was being a place of where people could go for spiritual direction and guidance and retreats. So that's the other ministry that the fathers of the resurrection had. And sometimes they had famous people who were part of people coming forward for spiritual direction. And perhaps the most famous was Princess Margaret. And the great thing about Murfield and the Murfield fathers was that they had a great sense of humor, self-deprecating humor. And so Princess Margaret at the time, this is in the 1960s, would make an annual pilgrimage up to Murfield where she would talk with her spiritual director, Trevor Huddleston, who was seen as a giant of spiritual direction at that time. And she would make her confession, speak with him, and then get back in the limousine and go back to London. And the story was told that one time she was there, and as she left the community house with Trevor, she looked out over the beautiful lawns of the college and the campus, and she said, "You know what you really need over there in that corner is a weeping willow." And Trevor said, "Yes, ma'am, that would be just lovely." Well, 2 weeks later, don't you know that a young weeping willow tree was delivered to the campus and duly planted. And the only problem was that in her choice of that site, she picked the one place on the campus where no living thing would grow. So every year, the weeping willow would promptly die. But they didn't have the heart to tell her that. So every year, the community would go out and buy a slightly larger weeping willow, plant it in the same place, and she would always admire how well it was doing. The other great story about her is that she was the first one to integrate the community dining room for the religious community. Because it was an all-male religious community, women who were on retreat, and this shows you how long ago this was, women who were on retreat or visiting the community would actually eat in the kitchen away from the men in the dining room. But Margaret one time announced that she was staying for luncheon, and they didn't have the heart to tell her she'd have to be in the kitchen, so she integrated the dining room by her presence. And of course, everyone was very mesmerized by her, and people, all the Murfield fathers were looking up from their soup and bread and admiring her. And at one point in her conversations, she was seated next to Trevor, she stopped and she removed both of her earrings and put them down on the table. And there was suddenly great silence in the dining room, and everyone was looking at her, and she simply said, "They hurt." It was a great place to be trained, and they were unequivocally training priests to be parish priests working in their congregations. And we have two readings today that I think actually are right on the mark when it comes to think about what we do in our ministry, both ordained and our ministry through our baptism. And those are illustrated by the first reading from the Acts of the Apostles and the Gospel. Now, I've referenced both of these readings in previous sermons, but I am going to just highlight again that for me, these two stories, the one from the Acts of the Apostles and the other from John's Gospel, truly epitomize and flesh out what we celebrated 2 weeks ago on Easter. This is really the explanation of what it means to be a resurrected people, what it means to follow in Jesus' footsteps, what it means to say that we are Christians. So a little bit of context. In the Acts of the Apostles, it's about Paul's conversion. And I always say, note, there's no white horse in this story. They're walking in this story. And Jesus appears to Paul. And that's remarkable, but it's especially remarkable in that it's Paul that Jesus appears to. And as I've said in the past, Paul, when I was in seminary, had a pretty low stockholding among Christians. Paul was considered problematic on a number of issues. But this actually humanizes Paul, this story, in a way that's very profound and makes us understand how remarkable Paul was. Because we're told right from the beginning that Paul is the appointed persecutor of Christians. Paul is the person who goes out and investigates and arrests people who are following Jesus and then brings them back to be imprisoned and tried in Jerusalem. And everybody knows Saul, as his name was then, as being this terrible, terrible person. And what's so moving to me is not just the story of Paul's conversion, of his blindness, being able then to see, and then all that Paul accomplished as a great apostle of the gospel. But what humanized Paul for me was to realize, and it's hinted at in this story, is that every time Paul would have to go and meet followers of Jesus, he'd have to overcome their fear of him, his reputation. People must have asked themselves, as Ananias does in this story, is this a trap? So Paul not only proclaimed the gospel, but his ministry depended on seeking forgiveness for what he had done. How he had hurt and destroyed the people who were followers of Jesus, but now was a great apostle. And the fear that people must have had when they met him must have always struck him in his heart and reminded him of his past. And that's amplified, I think, in the gospel story. Because, we all come to ministry with baggage. We all come with shortcomings, failures, mistakes, things that we've done that we regret, missteps, errors, unconscious decisions that we've made that have hurt people. That is the common human experience. So to get forward a message or to present a message of the extraordinary radical forgiveness of God made known through Jesus Christ, there's this gospel story from John. And again, you have to provide a little bit of context in order for the gospel to really resonate, I think. So we're told that Peter and the other disciples have returned to being fishermen. Their ministry as followers of Jesus has fallen apart completely with the death of Jesus. And so they go back to what they did, which was fishing. So they're fishing through the night, and they catch nothing. And come dawn, Peter, the beloved disciple, who is John, are in the boat with the other disciples. And they see a figure on the shore. And it's early. They can't quite make out who it is. And John says to the boat, "It's the Lord." And then look carefully at what Jesus does. This is such an extraordinary moment in the gospel. Remember, Jesus and Peter's last recorded conversation, the last moment where Peter was called upon to stand with Jesus, he had failed. he had denied knowing him 3 times while Jesus was imprisoned. That is where Peter is coming from. That's his experience and memory of Jesus. And I had a wonderful teacher in seminary who said, put yourself in Peter's place. If the last thing you had done was betray Jesus, not once but 3 times publicly, who would be the last person that you would want to see but Jesus? And would you not perhaps get dressed and dive into the water? We know that Peter can't swim, so this is also an extraordinary demonstration of Peter's resolve. If it was an ordinary human in relationship, would we not swim in the opposite direction of the person that we had betrayed to escape punishment, guilt, criticism? But Peter must know Jesus well enough that he can't wait for the boat to get to the shore. He has to take his fear of water and jump into the water and swim. He can't wait to be with Jesus again. And that's such a powerful part of the story. This incredible grounding in unconditional love that Peter must have known in order to do what he did. And then it gets even better. We're told that there's this wonderful relaxed moment among friends. Everything is right again. Jesus is cooking, obviously is a good cook. He makes breakfast for his friends, and they sit around, and they're together again. The relationships are restored. Jesus is among them again, this person that they loved so much. And Jesus then says to Peter, "Do you love me?" Now, what follows is a 3-fold declaration by Peter as to how much he loves Jesus. And it must be, under John's writing in the gospel, an echo of a 3-fold denial. So having denied Jesus 3 times, now Peter affirms Jesus 3 times in his love for him. And look carefully at what Jesus says. You know, if I were saying to someone, "Do you love me?" and they said, "Yes, of course I love you," I would immediately say, "Well, how much?" Show me. What Jesus says 3 times in slightly different words is, "Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my lambs." It's as if to say, this is it. This is the message. This is the message of the resurrection. Gathering close with people that we love and care about, and proclaiming Jesus as Lord and among us in our community. It's that reason that pastoral care is at the center of parish ministry. All the other things that happen in parishes are all important. Everything matters. But at the heart, it's about pastoral care. It's about pastoral care of the clergy person caring for the congregation. Every decision that is made by a parish is founded, or should be founded, on a question of pastoral care. But it also means that's what you all do because of your baptisms. Because of the promises made at your baptism, you have promised to feed and tend the flock. And at St. Peter's, we do a great job of caring for one another. But Jesus expands it, I think, in vision. And it's not just about people who are friends and love one another and feel so comfortable in each other's company. That's the glory of parish life. But the ministry of a parish goes beyond that. We are called to tend and feed the sheep of the world. People who are frightened, dispossessed, disenfranchised, angry, hurt. These are the sheep that we're commanded to care and to feed. And it's so central, I think, to our understanding of what it means to be a Christian. So I give thanks for parish ministry. On this, the Sunday when we have our annual meeting, it is a time for us to gather and to say, thank God for St. Peter's Church. Thank God for our friendships and our relationships, for our life together. But it's also always a question in ministry to say, where do we go from here? And how can we better feed the sheep of the world? Amen.